In this short presentation, from finite to kingdom thinking, I want to illustrate the positive and helpful contribution that cultural resources can have on the theology and practice of Christian leadership. I'll present a brief introduction to Simon Sinek's recent book, Infinite Game, and then contextualize it for the Divinity College. The material presented here is adapted from a presentation, short devotional presentation I shared with my colleagues in a faculty meeting recently. So let's consider an overview of the infinite game that Sinek talks about. He says, and let me say this, he's not addressing developing a Christian leadership theory or addressing Christians in any explicit way. It's more of a leadership paradigm for the corporate world, the business world, and other, education, that sort of thing. But he says there are two ways of approaching the world of business, the corporate world. One, which is the most common, is as a finite game. But the preferable one, which he offers up, is in that the way we should approach things is through what he calls the infinite game. Now, a finite game focuses on the short term, focuses on quarterly profits and the quarterly profits report. It focuses on or endeavors to manipulate the business cycle to maximize end-of-year bonuses. It obsesses about competition rather than focusing on core mission and values of the company. In contrast to the finite mindset, the infinite mindset is mission-focused. It looks to the long term. It works to advance the success of the organization as a whole, and not only personal performance and rewards. Well, let's consider the problem and an illustration of finite thinking. Well, the problem is that the world is full of finite thinkers and leaders. An illustration of this is Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. I just want to read a short section from Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, because it illustrates very well the differences. Bill Gates reflects an infinite mindset, Ballmer reflects a finite mindset. And this is what Sinek says. In 2013, at his final press conference as CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer summed up his career in a most finite-minded way. He defined success based on the metrics he selected within the time frame of his own tenure in the job. To quote Ballmer, "In the last 5 years, probably Apple has made more money than we have," he said. "But in the last 13 years, I bet we've made more money than almost anybody on the planet, and that, frankly, is a great source of pride to me." End quote. It seems Ballmer was trying to say that under the 13 years of his leadership, his company had won. Imagine how different that press conference could have been if, instead of looking back at a balance sheet, Ballmer shared all the things Microsoft had done and could still do to advance Bill Gates' original infinite vision, which was, to quote, "to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more." Now, whether or not Microsoft has fulfilled that is another question, but it reflects the different way the Ballmer's focused on the balance sheet, Gates is focused on this sort of world-changing vision, clearly are different. Ballmer had a finite mindset. He wanted to make more money than Apple. Gates had an infinite mindset, to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. He had a vision to change and to make the world a better place. And in many respects, he's done that. The software I'm using right now to present this lecture is a product of Microsoft PowerPoint. Let's consider another example. George W. Bush on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln on May 1st, 2003. He gave the now infamous Mission Accomplished speech. The speech reflected that he was playing an infinite game in Iraq. Now, I don't believe in the speech he ever used the term Mission Accomplished, but the banner behind him proclaimed it and certainly reflected the ethos and the mindset of Bush's finite game that he was playing in Iraq. And although Bush recognized that further work remained in Iraq, the banner behind him proclaimed mission accomplished and clearly reflected his desire and his mindset. Bush thought that after toppling Saddam Hussein, freedom-seeking lovers of Jeffersonian democracy would spring from the heart of every Iraqi, and soon after a pro-Western and democratic ally would be established in the heart of the Middle East. Bush wanted to play, in other words, a finite game in Iraq. And who could blame him for wanting that, really? According to his finite mindset, however, he had only to oust Hussein and establish a pro-Western democracy in Iraq, and his work would be done. Unfortunately for Bush, the insurgents were playing an infinite game, one they had been playing for centuries, perhaps millennia, with various would-be masters from the Ottoman Turks to the British Empire, even back to Alexander the Great. More recently, in the 2020 election, many people, regardless of party, breathed a sigh of relief. The Trump presidency is finally over and life will now settle down to normal. Well, once we get past COVID. But that is finite thinking. The divisions and tensions that led to the foment over the last 4 years are still there. People on each side of the divide will continue to foment against each other. The parties will not now beat their swords into plowshares, but they will sharpen them in preparation for the next front in the ongoing field of political battle and the perennial struggle for political power. Well, let's consider some characteristics of the infinite game and thinking. 2 chief characteristics. The first one is that the infinite game is dynamic and ongoing. The world of business, the world, the corporate world, the world of politics, the world really of any creative and robust endeavor does not end with the end of the fourth quarter or the end of the year or the last down of play. The game of business is ever moving, ever unfolding into new horizons of opportunity and challenge. The infinite game is also transcendent. It exists beyond the individual. Each member participates in something beyond themselves, something that does not diminish the individual, but the larger organization gives the activity of each member an expression and contribution that is beyond them and larger than them. So this is important. It's not that it's not this sort of pure collectivism that when we talk about it being transcendent, where the individual is swallowed up and lost into an amorphous, larger organization. The activity of the individual and the members are important and distinct and unique, but they gain their significance, or at least part of their significance, because they are contributing to something larger than the individual. Now, of course, many people in the world of business, politics, and other organizations do not behave this way. If you've worked, longer than 5 minutes in a business or some other organization, you clearly know that not everyone is thinking and not everyone is playing the infinite game, but a lot of people are playing the finite game. In other words, they serve themselves. They focus on the short term and what benefits them rather than seeing their individual activity as participating in and contributing to something to a cause and organization that transcends them. And this is a problem that is perennial and pervasive both in the business world, any bureaucratic organization, whether it's education, politics, social services, or the church. So what does the infinite game and infinite thinking, how could it possibly relate to the world of McMaster Divinity College and its faculty? Well, let's consider the Divinity College. Faculty have a propensity for finite thinking. It's easy for us as faculty, I think, to fall into default finite thinking. We fall prey to short-term and myopic thinking. Finite thinking, some have called it the tyranny of the urgent, is a perennial problem for people generally, and I think also for faculty members. And COVID, I think the last 8 months or so of the COVID experience has exacerbated that propensity. Why is that the case? Well, because we're scrambling to redesign our syllabi for all online learning. We are endeavoring to learn new delivery options and the learning management system. We're trying to master or at least get comfortable with the ins and outs of Zoom, WebEx, and Camtasia. We can also fall into the finite thinking of the comparison game. Does so-and-so have more publications than I do? Are their classes more popular than mine, etc.? Do they present more papers at conferences than I do? And so those are ways of finite thinking that are that faculty can be prone to. Now, obviously, we cannot pretend that those issues are unimportant. Publications and learning Zoom or learning how to work with Camtasia, those are not unimportant things that faculty do. But if we're not careful, they can become all-consuming and just detract us from playing the infinite game of McMaster Divinity College. Now, Sinek's book focuses on the corporate and business world. The life of the seminary is not a direct comparison, but the college has its own forms of infinite thinking and I think points of comparison. And the purpose of this presentation is to highlight a cultural example of leadership, a cultural model of leadership that has positive implications for Christian leaders. In other words, it has some direct positive correlations. In my previous example of Dale, I highlighted mostly negative correlations that Dale drew between the origin of strategy and his theory of Christian leadership as the leading edge, maximizing competitive advantage, etc. Here is an example that I think, although can't be just taken whole, lock, stock, and barrel, and doesn't directly compare in every way to Christian leadership, but it does have some important fundamental points of resonance with Christian leadership, which I want to highlight in respect to faculty at the college. So, infinite or kingdom thinking has two facets. When we think about the life of the college, faculty at the life of the college, I think there are the two basic elements of infinite thinking or playing the infinite game that relate to our work as faculty. And the first is, just as infinite thinking is dynamic and ongoing in the business world, that is, it does not end with the quarterly profits report. So also for us, thinking about the present and future of theological education and our mission to prepare leaders for the church, academy, and the world does not end with learning the tricks of the online learning management system or rolling out a new program, although those activities can be products and manifestations of our participation in the infinite game of MDC. In other words, part of this is orientation of attitude and mindset and why and how we're doing things. The mission of the college, in other words, does not end with June 15th when we go away for research and summer holiday. The point is that we are engaged in a dynamic field of endeavor that calls us ever forward to innovate and adapt to the emerging world of theological education. The second way that the infinite game relates to the work of the college is that it is transcendent. Infinite thinking lifts our eyes beyond the next lecture and writing project. It keeps our eyes focused on the college's mission, which ultimately, we believe, contributes to the kingdom of God emerging around us. Now, that raises the question, what is the infinite game of MDC? Well, it's shaping lives for ministry, service, and leadership in the church, academy, and the world. And by doing so, we participate in God's kingdom that is emerging in the world. In other words, our infinite game is part of the infinite game of participating in and seeing the coming of God's kingdom. Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 to 34 says this. Jesus told his disciples, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Playing the infinite game is not an admonition to forsake long-term thinking. Jesus is not advocating a cavalier, live-for-today attitude. But he's reminding us that when our focus is participating in the coming kingdom of God, that will entail the daily concerns and necessities of life. When we keep our eyes on the larger mission of the college to participate in the coming kingdom of God by preparing leaders for service in the church, academy, and the world, we will also attend to the particular activities, like preparing lectures and logging into Zoom sessions. But we will do so with an intentionality of participating in the coming kingdom of God, which is the ultimate infinite game.